There's a quiet truth about kids who grow up feeling invisible. They don't always cry, they don't always complain, but something inside them slowly shuts down. And when those kids become adults, they often walk into a room feeling like they should take up less space, like attention is something they haven't earned. They step into relationships wondering, am I being too much? They achieve something big, but instead of celebrating, they wait for someone to overlook it. Because deep down, blending into the background feels normal to them. Not because they're unworthy, not because they lack talent, but because they were raised in a kind of emotional silence. Psychologists actually have a name for this: internalized neglect schema. Basically, your brain gets used to being brushed aside. It starts expecting it. You learn to believe that your needs are annoying or too much work. A kid who's ignored enough times eventually stops asking. They teach themselves that wanting love or attention is some kind of mistake. Think about a child in a crowded room, gently tugging their parent's sleeve, waiting for even a tiny bit of acknowledgement. You've seen it on playgrounds, in classrooms, maybe even in your own family. That quiet kid who doesn't demand attention, who just disappears into the background. On the outside, it looks harmless. Inside that child's mind, something heavy is happening. For a child, being ignored isn't no big deal. It feels like something cracks at the center of who they are. And here's the thing: neglect doesn't always look like abuse. It's not always yelling or cruelty. Sometimes it's just absence. The missed glances, the unanswered questions, the forgotten birthday. The parent who's too stressed, too tired, or too distracted to notice what their kid is feeling. But the mind of an ignored child gets shaped by these little moments. It affects how they see themselves and how they move through the world decades later. We tell ourselves kids are resilient, they'll bounce back. And sure, kids adapt, but adapting isn't healing. A child who learns to live without acknowledgement survives by shrinking, by hiding their needs, by deciding they don't matter as much as everyone else. And that belief follows them into adulthood like a shadow. From a psychological perspective, being acknowledged isn't some warm, fuzzy bonus. It's literally part of survival. Research says kids need 3 basic things: safety, stimulation, and connection. Connection, being seen and valued, is the one that shapes their entire identity. John Bowlby, the attachment theory guy, said that when caregivers consistently respond to a child's needs, the child forms trust. That trust becomes the blueprint for every future relationship. But when a child reaches out and no one reaches back, they don't just feel ignored. They start believing, maybe I don't deserve love. Maybe I'm not that important. And this isn't some dramatic exaggeration. Neuroscience shows that when kids' attempts for connection are repeatedly ignored, their brain treats it like danger. Cortisol spikes. Stress becomes their baseline. Emotional regulation gets shaky. But from the outside, they just look like the quiet kid. When a kid is mistreated, the damage is obvious. But when they're ignored, the wounds are hidden. Emotional cuts that don't show up until adulthood, when they try to love, try to dream, try to connect, and hit the old, unhealed places inside them. Adults who grew up ignored often carry low self-esteem, fear of sharing their feelings, fear of rejection, people-pleasing, or avoiding relationships altogether. Some become workaholics chasing approval. Some become conflict avoiders. Some become so independent they can't trust anyone. And some just stop trying. Because they learned early on, what's the point? Let's say you were 8 years old, proud of a drawing you made. You show it to your parent. They're on the phone. Later at dinner, they're too distracted. Eventually, you stop showing your drawings. You stop showing your excitement. You put your joy away. Fast forward to adulthood, that same person struggles to celebrate anything. That's emotional neglect. Not visible, not loud, but real as hell. A 2019 study found that childhood emotional neglect is strongly linked to lifelong loneliness, even if the person is surrounded by people. Because the emptiness is internal, not social. Most parents who ignore their kids aren't monsters. They're overwhelmed, exhausted, dealing with mental health struggles, or drowning in work. Sometimes they simply don't realize how deep the impact is. But intention doesn't erase impact. To a child, silence still hurts. Kids who were ignored often develop impressive strengths: independence, perfectionism, peacekeeping. But underneath, there's usually fatigue, anxiety, and the fear of being a burden. And the saddest adaptation? The child who quits trying altogether. The kid who decides, nobody cares anyway. Ignored kids rarely even talk about it. There's no huge event to point to, no dramatic story, no visible scars. Their pain is hidden in all the moments that should have mattered, but didn't. So they grow up downplaying everything. Nothing bad happened to me. But the truth is, the absence of emotional support is trauma. You can grow up in a house full of food and toys and still starve emotionally. The long-term effects are huge. Studies show ignored children grow into adults with higher risks of depression, anxiety, attachment issues, and emotional numbness. But here's the part people don't talk about. Ignored children often develop extraordinary empathy. They notice things others miss: facial expressions, tones, emotional shifts, because their survival depended on it. That hyper-awareness can be a superpower, but it comes at a cost. They understand everyone else and ignore themselves. And another thing, when a child is ignored, their sense of identity doesn't fully form. They weren't mirrored. No one reflected their emotions back to them. So as adults, they search for validation not because they're needy, but because they never got that reflection growing up. But here's where it gets beautiful. Even ignored children carry a quiet hope. They read about healing, they journal, they explore psychology, they go to therapy, they chase the light they never received. That alone is strength. And the brain? It can rewire. Every time you speak up and someone listens, your brain heals. Every time you set a boundary, your nervous system strengthens. Every small act of self-respect is like pouring water on an old fire. Healing doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like telling a friend, "I need you to hear me right now." Or finally saying, "That hurt me." Or sitting alone and whispering, "My feelings matter." These small moments, they break generational cycles. And here's something important. Parents who ignore their kids often grew up the same way. Neglect passes down quietly, silently, invisibly, until someone decides it stops here. When an ignored child grows up and learns to value themselves, they don't just heal themselves, they heal generations that came before them, and generations that will come after them. Ignored children often think their existence didn't matter, but their story has power. Their resilience is unmatched. Their empathy is deep. Their truth helps others feel less alone. So if you were that child, if you sat in your room waiting for someone to notice you, if you carried emotions too heavy for your small hands, if you ever questioned whether your presence mattered, let me tell you something straight. You matter then. You matter now. Healing isn't about undoing the past. It's about giving yourself the love you should have had all along. It's about seeing yourself through compassion instead of neglect. It's about understanding that what happened shaped you, but it doesn't get to define you forever. The story of the ignored child is one of pain, yes, but also one of unbelievable resilience. It's about silence that turned into strength, invisibility that turned into empathy, and wounds that, once acknowledged, transformed into wisdom. Because the truth is, you were never actually invisible. You were just waiting for someone, maybe even yourself, to finally see you.